Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Welcome to another episode of Chargers Unleashed. Myself, Dan Wolkenstein, alongside Jake Hefner from the LAFB Network. And we have a fun show today because, Jake, we get another special guest, and actually two special guests coming into the show today. Without further ado, folks who know just as much, if not more, about Chargers than we have, because they have been doing this for much longer than we have in the podcast world. Friends of the show, fellow podcasters, you might know them from Locked On Chargers, our friends David and Dan from Locked On Chargers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you for spending some time with us. We've got some fun things planned. How are both of you doing?
Well, I'll go first here. I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here with you guys. I mean, I got to hang out with the other Dan for the first time. A couple weeks ago, we went to SoFi Stadium and got to soak that in together. But really, I mean, the guest list that you guys have had, I'm very honored to be in that company. The Asante Samuel Jr.'s, the Rashawn Slaters, the Drew Tranquils, and now a Dan Wade, a different Dan W. So excited to be in the long list of esteemed guests to join the program.
I love how you throw yourself on that list, Daniel. That's fantastic.
I am. I
mean, yes, of course. I mean, really awesome to be on the show with you guys. Obviously, we've all been talking about the Chargers for a long time. Jake, you and I go way back. I mean, we've been doing this a long time, my friend. So it's good to get on a show with you again and talk some Chargers football. But I mean, hey, guys, I think we got a lot to be excited about with this Chargers team. A lot of change, but a lot of exciting change for me.
Yes, and Jake and I, we've talked about this ad nauseum for our listeners. They probably heard it, but we haven't gotten a chance to talk about just that. So on this episode, we figured we would kind of get into something that I think a lot of Chargers fans are probably feeling. There's all kinds of excitement, all kinds of buzz going on for this 2021 season, but there's also some, a little bit would say, angst. Some people a little trepidation. Some people might be a little worried. So there's some optimism. There's also some pessimism. So on this episode, we are going to go forward a box, and we are going to go through the things that we are most excited for and or scared poopless about going into this 2021 season. So be prepared. There may be some emotions on this podcast.
Dude,
Jake.
Wolkenstein, you need to get a shirt made now with the Charger lightning bolt that just says scared poopless. Sorry, I can't let that one walk, dude.
Hey, it's a children's
man.
It's a children's show today. You never know who's listening.
I don't remember there being a G-rated on it.
Okay, good point. Anyways, so lots has happened in the last 18 months or so. We've gone through terrible times, new coaching staff, new players, a draft, free agency, lots of progressions. So we're just kind of do a little roundtable here. Guests first. David, we'll start with you. Put you on the hot seat here. We'll start with one thing that you are either excited for or absolutely terrified going into the season.
Well, I mean, anyone out there that's listened to our show, they know that I'm the optimist for sure. So I obviously have to step forward with that. So for me, the one thing I'm very, very excited about is something that has eluded Phillip Rivers his entire career pretty much, and that is a competent offensive line. I'm so excited about this. It is absolutely instrumental to the success of this team. I have talked ad nauseum, and I mean ad nauseum, about building from the inside out, building the spine of your team, and the Chargers have not done that. They've built from the outside in. They've really got and focused on their skill position players. This offseason, you finally saw a commitment to the offensive line. They go out and get one of the best players at their position to anchor this offensive line in the middle, a guy who's had a lot of success, and Corey Linsley gave him a big contract. But that's what it takes. I mean, that's what it takes to go get a premier player as position. And just all the other moves, bringing in Oday Abushi, getting Rashawn Slater in the draft. I mean, just it's a completely revamped and overhauled offensive line. And I think you can't help but be excited because this is going to be a better pass protected team. They're going to be able to run the ball better, and that's going to just result in a more efficient and effective offense. So I'm just ecstatic about that.
Now, Dan, I got to kick it over to you because I know every Chargers fan probably talked about how important it was to get that offensive line fixed. And everyone now is excited about that offensive line. Did you actually think that they would have been able to do what they did before free agency, before the coaching staff change, before the draft? Did you think it was possible?
I mean, if you would have told me that they would have had to replace 4 of the 5 offensive linemen, I probably would have said no. Just that seems unrealistic. And the other thing about it is they didn't bring back anybody, right? They didn't settle for what they've had. And we've seen that so many times with this team in the past. It's like they didn't give the Forrest Lamp the 1 year, okay, maybe another year we'll do it kind of thing. Or Dan Feeney, we saw them trot him out there so many times, never really lived up to the hype of the 3rd round billing. They didn't do that this year. They didn't settle. They said, hey, we're going to go replace the entire offensive line because we need to replace the entire offensive line. And as much as it looks better, it's different, right? Like, it's exciting to see different dudes go out there and compete for this offensive line that we haven't seen yet. And I think that it also kind of leads me, though, to something I'm terrified about, right? Which is just the depth of this team at certain positions, and especially on the offensive line, because right now, Brian Bulaga played, less than half the snaps last year. His backup right now is either Storm Norton or Trey Pipkins. We've seen that a couple of times. That's something to be a little concerned about. On the interior, I like Scott Quessenberry. I like the thought of Brendan Hymus, but I didn't love what I saw from Tyree St. Louis last year. So there are questions, and I think for me, as much as I'm excited, anyone who's followed the Chargers long enough knows you can't have nice things all the time, right? And you want to see it before you believe it with this team, just like all the leads that end up evaporating later on in the game. You can't get too excited about a big lead if you're Charger fans, and you also can't get too excited about the top, premier positions at these players without thinking about who is behind them. And it's not just the offensive line, right? At safety, you have Mark Webb, a 7th round pick, and Alohi Gilman, a 2020 6th round pick, as the 2 main reserves behind 2 guys that have missed a lot of games over the last couple of seasons in Derwin James and Nazir Adderley. So yes, to your question, I'm stoked about the offensive line. I'm stoked just at them actually putting premier draft capital, only the 2nd tackle or offensive lineman they've taken in the 1st round in 30 plus years. The other was DJ Fluker. They spent all the big money on the offensive line. He didn't mention Matt Feiler. That's another guy I'm really excited about. But
good call.
At the same time, following the Chargers, you learn to be terrified of certain things. So for me, depth is one of those things where it's like, I love what you have. Of course, if Brian Bulaga stays out there healthy the entire season, perfect, right? I mean, that you feel really good about that. But if it's, him playing 50% of the snaps, Trey Pipkins playing 50% of the snaps, that's a little bit more terrifying.
Jake, that sounds a lot more like something that you're used to with the pessimism and worry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you agree? Do you think that we need to worry about the offensive line this year?
Wade said it best. It's you have to stop yourself from getting caught up in all of the flash and the names. And yeah, I fully agree with Wade on this. Dan, I said this to you, that I thought that replacing 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen this season would have been way overkill. I didn't foresee that happening. And even if they did, you probably wouldn't have thought that they would have gotten who they ended up replacing them all with. So
right.
that was a pipe dream within itself. But yeah, again, it's that word that I never want to bring up, especially at this time of the year, but you can't help but notice that the football gods have not smiled upon the Chargers over the last several years. And especially when it comes to the offensive line, it's kind of like whatever can happen will happen. And the great point by Wade to bring up about Brian Bulaga, it was a great free agent signing at the beginning of the season, but he really didn't get a chance to play a lot last year. He had a lingering back injury. It always seemed like the first series he was in there and then he was out. He was gone. So the depth behind this offensive line as well is something to be concerned about. If the injury, I caught myself there saying that nasty word. If that old darkness friend of ours rears its ugly head again, absolutely.
But that's another thing to get excited about too, though, right? Is a new sports performance program that they're running, new sports performance trainers, a new kind of analytical thinking about how they're doing these off-season training activities, right? Doing the OTs and stuff, no competitive one-on-ones, no competitive 11-on-11s.
Collaborating with the players and talking with them and trying to get that, that program set up together. And I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and we'll have to see results, but at the same time, I think that does also kind of wrap itself back around into being something I'm excited for, something different. We saw what the last regime had. We saw what they were able to do with John Lawton, who was, I love that dude. Like, it's hard to not love John Law. Like, I was sad to see him go, but at a certain time, when you keep getting the same results over and over again, it's nice to see them revamp things, maybe look at it from a different angle and hope you can get some better results.
It's really, I think when you think about this team as a whole, and you look at all of the ways, it's one of those, like, what can go wrong will go wrong with the Chargers. And then you kind of flip it on its head this offseason. It feels like everything kind of fell in their direction. Like, somehow Rashawn Slater falls to us. Somehow Asante Samuel Jr. falls to us. And everyone has talked about how much they wanted those two players specifically all offseason long. I think one of the things that I am probably most excited about, I'll put a positive spin on this, I just am looking forward to adjustments. There have been so many times that we have seen this team come out, look good, look bad, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then the second half comes, look the exact same, and we're getting torched. How many 28-7 leads have we blown? How many last-second field goals have we blown? How many penalties? I mean, you name it. We are getting torched. And one of the things that Chris Harris Jr. had talked to us about on a previous show was he's excited to see a scheme in which you can actually prepare to stop your opposing team's best players and, like, making adjustments and actually scheming for that. And I'm sure coaches want to say that they do that, but the proof's in the pudding. And we have not seen adjustments from any of the coaching staff on any part of the football field, offense, defense, and special teams, for years. And so I think one of the things I am most excited about is just adjustments. I think Brandon Staley hangs his hat on that as his calling card from first half to second half. He always ends up getting better. Second half points per game allowed is so much less than first half. And that's because of adjustments. So adjustments. I think that's the key to success in most NFL games. Those who can adjust the most and the quickest have the best chance for success.
Preach, my friend, preach. That is definitely something I'm looking forward to as well. I mean, it's been so incredibly frustrating to see the same offensive game plan rolled out there with the same repetitive runs on early downs that did not work, had no success. They're just misguided, attempts on fourth down. I mean, there's so many ridiculous examples of them just not being able to make adjustments, and it's been so crystal clear. For me, I mean, I think one of the things you talked about is special teams, and that's one of the things I'm excited about is a drastically improved special teams with a coach that has been coaching special teams recently, who is a young, exciting coach, a very articulate man. If you haven't heard Darius Swinton talk, I mean, that guy is inspiring, man. I mean, he is a coach, a guy that you want to follow, you want to listen to, and just hearing all of the innovative ways he's helping teach his players and helping them retain that information so they can go out there and execute, I think is really exciting. I'm looking forward to shorter fields on offense and longer fields on defense. I mean, that's something we have not seen. It's so underrated field position, but the Chargers have had terrible field position the last several years. It's just another thing that I think is just going to make this team much better.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. And I mean, I think with Darius Swinton, it just seems like everything's so purposeful, right? And I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about is like maybe some things at the end of the game won't go well for the Chargers this season, as long as it's not the same reasons they weren't going well for the Chargers in the last couple of seasons. Because something that also kind of terrifies me at this point is we don't know if it's still going to be Ty Long, Michael Badgley out there, right? The same two specialists that, contributed to some of those special teams woes that they've had. I hope that, Badgley can bounce back. I believe them when they say it's an open competition with the new coaching staff. I'll trust their judgment until it's proven otherwise. But just the coordination, right? Like just the already running through late game situations. And we're not going to get, hopefully, Justin Herbert running a quarterback sneak when the rest of the offensive line is pass blocking, right? We're not going to get half the offense running onto the field while half the specialists are running on the field because they don't know what to do in those situations.
All the blocked punts. I mean,
How many press conferences can we go to where the main key theme is miscommunication, right? There was a miscommunication. Something happened, this happened, whatever, right? Like, if we know they couldn't have gone more opposite in the direction of someone who has miscommunications. I mean, if there's one thing that you can see right now from this coaching staff, because we know they have to prove success on the field, the communication isn't a problem so far, right? I mean, the communication seems like it's as good as it's ever been. The way these guys are articulating their thoughts, the plans that they're putting into place at practice, the fact that they're running 2 fields at the same time, just so they can run through so many simulations and throw so many different situations with so many different players. They're not just getting 15 snaps if you're the third string guy.
And installing the entire offense and installing the entire defense in that short span of time too. I mean, I think that when I heard that in that press conference, I was astounded. I was like, how do you do that? You installed 95% of a new offense and a new defense? Like, that is ridiculous. But that's the difference, though, in the competency of this coaching staff. I think that's why you feel really excited with everything that they've done so far. Of course, they got to go out there and prove it on the football field.
Now, Jake, we've talked about the special teams for a while now and how horrible it's been. What would a good special teams year for the Chargers be, in your opinion, this year?
See, that's kind of what I was going to say, because I agree with what both David and Dan were saying as far as their points making on special teams. But guys, if we were to say what's the one thing that you could guarantee me right now, 100% that's going to be improved in 2021, it has to be special teams, only because it can't get any worse than what it was in 2020. I mean, you have Badgley missing 12 kicks. You can't return a punt for more than 30 yards. Your coverage team was horrible. Your punt blocking was horrible. Penalties, repetitive mistakes. I mean, the list goes on and on.
They couldn't even get on the field on time.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
the most mundane of tasks.
I mean, name every possible stupid thing that you could think of for special teams. They did it.
Am I watching a high school team? What is this?
There it is.
There was literally a time last season, and Jake was laughing so hard at me, where every time the Chargers were fielding a punt, I literally was like, don't catch it. Just run away. I don't care. I don't want you to be anywhere near it. I'll take the 20. Fire. Like, literally. And I mean, how many times have we seen this go wrong? And so, I mean, are we looking for what, like a top 20 special teams as an improvement? Like, where do you see the barometer of, like, this was a success?
Man, just give me an improvement, man. My expectations, my bar is extremely low, but you can't go any lower. That's it. It's just, it doesn't feel too long ago when Travis Benjamin fielded a punt and then he decided to run it backwards into the end zone.
That's the only thing we didn't see last season. That one takes the cake,
and you think it can't get any worse than that, and then it did week after week after week. So, again, with Darius,
average, right? I mean, just to answer that question, I'm not going to put a quantity or a number on it, but I just want average special teams play. I want special teams that aren't going to lose you games. Because I'll
take no blocked kicks, no muffed punts.
Yeah, just
no blocked kicks,
enough.
No muffed punts.
You give me that.
Make all your kicks inside the 50, and try to make some kicks outside the 50 too. That would be nice. Make all of your extra points. How about that? I mean, let's do the simple tasks that we need to do. I mean, and nothing spectacular. That would be completely fine with me.
Just be good. Just be good. Just be average.
That's it.
It's fine.
If there's one thing that I would celebrate mediocrity if it meant that this special teams is mediocre. That's fine with me.
But I'll see it when I believe it.
Yeah. There we go. Zing. Now, this is an easy one. This is a layup. Everyone's excited about Justin Herbert, obviously. One of the things that I am I don't want to say concerned, but I'm a little tepid, maybe a little timid on, is the hype level is so high for this kid. And deservedly so. He had a record-breaking season as rookie quarterback. But I am a little concerned or terrified that we are holding him up to standards that might just not be fair. Do you feel that this fan base or folks covering this team are putting too much stock in Justin Herbert this soon?
I think they're really excited, right, Dan? Yeah. I think it's hard not to be really excited after the season, the historic season that he just had, and not realize the fact that he has this immense amount of expectations now in year 2. And I think you also have to look at the history of the Chargers quarterbacks and how just extremely fortunate that they've been. I mean, they go from Dan Fouts, they got guys like Phillip Rivers, and now you immediately step into Justin Herbert, who by all accounts has incredible talent. But I think what one thing gives me trepidation a little bit is that this is another new coaching staff and another new offense that he has to learn. And yes, we all know he's incredibly intelligent, but are fans prepared to see him fail a little bit in the beginning while he's grasping this offense? That's a question that I have.
Sure, and I think too many people might just be assuming smart kid and taking things and saying, hey, he can do it, and he's done it. Obviously you usually don't get that track record of being able to do it and still being successful. So I think he obviously has that in his pocket. But that's the thing about being the Chargers quarterback specifically, and I think there's other teams that you could find some common veins, but you have to be the savior, right? And now, especially for Justin Herbert, it's not even that you have to be the savior that delivers the Super Bowl, which the team doesn't have in its franchise, but you also have to make the team relevant in Los Angeles, right? So you have to be the reason that fans want to show up to games, and you have to be the one guy out of every good quarterback you just mentioned, David, Drew Brees as well, to take this team to the promised land, which no one has ever done. And I think, yes, I mean, the answer is yes, the expectations are unfair. Do I like the way they're combating it? 100%, and Brandon Staley said it best. No one's going to have more expectations for him than us. So as long as if we have the highest expectations kind of out of anyone, he can't really not live up to fans' expectations and those kinds of things. He doesn't really have to worry about that because his expectations for himself are so high. But the MVP talk, because that's been a thing that's been out there, right? I mean, me and David talked about it the other day on Bet Online. We were looking just at the odds. He has the 5th best odds right now to win MVP. Like, that's ridiculous. He's tied with reigning NFL MVP Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott, who was lighting the league on fire last year before he got injured and is coming back to, a pretty loaded offensive skill position player. So the expectations are definitely there. But and actually, this will let me, kind of sell LAFB for a second, those who are, the place that's hosting this show right now, because I'm writing an article for them. Ryan DeRude, LAFB, doing a great job. But about just Justin Herbert and what it would look like for him to win an MVP, right? Because if you're trying to hit those expectations, it means you're going to have to produce a certain amount. And just over the last 3 years, the NFL MVP has averaged 48.7 total touchdowns, right? Justin Herbert had 36 last year. Obviously, that's a great first year. They've also, though, and this is the other thing, it's so team related, right? Like, obviously he's going to have to play well, but out of the last 5 MVPs, the average record of those teams is 12.4. So if the Chargers don't get to 12, 13 wins, and obviously now it's a 17-game schedule, right? So that's going to change the numbers and figures a little bit there, but the team will have to be really good as well. It's a great player, but if the great player is not on a good team, you're not going to have that kind of recognition. So I don't think that the expectations might be fair. I do think he can attain, most of those things. Like, I mean, he obviously has the talent and those things to do it. I just don't think we can just assume it's going to happen right now. And I think that's part of the problem is, yes, he can do it. I mean, is he going to have some things standing his way? Yeah, he is. He has a tough division to play with. He has a new coaching staff. He has a pretty tough schedule, right? And he has to live up to being the rookie of the year and being compared to Joe Burrow and less so to a Tonga Vailoa, but he can get there. I just think that, yeah, the expectations, like you're saying, though, they might be unfair for a second-year quarterback, I think.
Eat your heart out, Dolphins fans.
I'll say this about the Justin Herbert situation and take it from a pessimistic approach, whatever you want to take it from. I mean,
here we go.
Obviously, none of us, nobody, zero expected to see what we saw last year from Justin Herbert. Right. It was all about Tua. We never knew exactly when we were going to see Herbert. That was always the big narrative. I was getting on a plane coming home, and I get in my seat, and I get a text message from a buddy of mine who says, Herbert's in. This is right before the kickoff. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? What the hell happened?
What? Right?
And after seeing that performance in Kansas City, even I told Dan, I said, okay, it was a masterful performance. I mean, amazing thing for a kid to step in like that in that type of situation and go out and do that. But even I said, let's pump the brakes and let's see what happens the following week and the next week. And Carolina, the following game, the next week, he didn't have that good of a game as he had in Kansas City, but it wasn't terrible. But as the year progressed on and on and on, you can't help but be amazed in what this kid did behind that offensive line to take the reins of that team, to put it on his shoulders, to do what he did, to show off his mobility, his,
the off-script plays for sure.
Yeah,
the bad situations he's put in.
Special arm talent
just
too. I mean,
everything.
the throws, right? The throws that no one, you don't think anyone else can make. I mean,
Right.
It's 3rd and 14. Bail us out, Justin. Here you go.
Exactly.
3rd and goal from the 17.
The bomb that he threw from his back foot in the Tampa Bay game.
That's what I knew.
It was amazing to me.
the Saints game. I mean, the rollout to the right,
rollout
and
to
just,
Keenan was
the throw on the run. I mean, that's
The throw to
ridiculous.
Mike Williams.
The
to
Mike
set up,
Williams one. That Mike
How
Williams
good
would
is
have
it
been probably
to have a quarterback
arguably
with mobility?
that Mike Williams play would have been one of the plays of the year, all for nothing because we missed the kick.
Yeah.
Right.
The missile to Keenan Allen too. I mean, there's just a lot of examples.
Which one?
I know.
To David's point, I get where the trepidation comes from because it's another coaching staff and another group of coordinators to deal with. But he's proven it since college. This is his 4th consecutive year with a brand new coaching staff, and he succeeded at every level. So it's hard to not get swept up in the hype. But damn it, Herbert and Staley as a combo, they make it fun to listen to and fun to have these type of expectations.
Yeah, I mean, if Justin Herbert's press conferences are any indication, he's like the racehorse that still has the blinders on his eyes. I mean, he's loosened up, let's say about this much. I mean, he's still pretty rigid, right? So I think he's still extremely focused. I think that he's going to be able to block out the noise because that's what he said. And I mean, I feel like you can believe Justin Herbert when he speaks because he doesn't really give you much. So I think what he does give you, he does try to be genuine with it. But yeah, you have to be really excited, but you have to temper those expectations a little bit because this is the 2nd year for him in the NFL, and there's still a lot that he needs to learn.
Worst case, I mean, if he just is as good as he was his freshman year in the NFL, like I'm calling that a major win. Like I don't need anything crazy. Just be as good as you were last year. I am pleasantly happy. All good here. So we talked about something.
I don't think that's a take a lot of people have though. Like I think most people would push back on you with that. Like just normal fans, right? Like
Totally.
I think most people would think that's a disappointing season if he's not making the leap. And I think that's what's tough about it. Because last year he was a top 15, borderline top 10 quarterback, right? And if you're getting that as your quarterback, in most situations you're very excited. In this situation, I think most Charger fans have their sights set a lot higher than that.
Well, even Brandon Staley said too. He said, hey, last year's performance is not going to cut it. It's not good enough. He said that you have to be better, and we expect him to be better. So that's not the expectations that Brandon Staley or Justin Herbert have said either. So if he does go out there and have that similar season, I think that's a failure, to be quite honest.
Well, and I think that's what I mean is if the sophomore slump is what he did last year, like I will take that to the bank all day long. Like that to me seems kind of like the floor, in my opinion.
Okay.
He should do much better than that. But a lot of people, like to your point, Dan, if folks said, oh, he did just as well as last year, that's a failure. Like I think is a failure for his potential. But in terms of you just look at it in a vacuum, that's a pretty darn good season for a second-year quarterback. Like
Phillip Rivers didn't have very many seasons that looked like that. If you look up Phillip Rivers' stats, and you're finding seasons where he's throwing 30-plus touchdowns. We're not even talking about the 5 rushing touchdowns, right? Because of Phillip Rivers, that's not part of the equation. But 31 passing touchdowns and 10 interceptions. Phillip Rivers has a handful. You know, you can count it on one hand. I think it's only 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
But, like, he never even had this season Justin Herbert just had in some senses. And the thing is, you were on the 4th most pass-happy attack last year. I think we're going to see a more efficient Justin Herbert, right? So, like, even though he might not get 50 passing attempts, that might be okay, and he still might be put in better situations to still put up really, really good numbers. So I think you're right. I think that is kind of the floor that we've set for Justin Herbert. And the other thing is going back to stadiums that have full crowds again, right? Facing those big moments he faced last season, but now you're doing it in the Superdome with 75,000 fans there, right? So I think it's little things like that, little differences and stuff like that we could see make a difference. But all anyone has done is doubted this dude, like, right? Yeah. And I think that's what, to Jake's point, is like, it's even hard to keep doubting them, because it's like, oh, like, yeah, I mean, he's not ready to go in game 2 against the Chiefs. He goes in and he does it. He's not ready for late game situations. And he's making throws to Mike Williams. He's going toe-to-toe with who would end up being the Super Bowl champs in Tom Brady against Tampa Bay so early on in his career. So it's like, if I'm putting money anywhere, it's hard for me to continue doubting the guy who just keeps proving all the doubters wrong.
So, Jake, I'm giving you this opportunity. The floor is yours. You have an opportunity to tell us something that you are scared of or something that you're excited about.
Something that scares you poopless.
I wonder what's going to happen next.
Dun, dun, dun. This is actually an easy one for me, Dan. I've talked to you about this on repeat since the end of the season. The run defense of this team scares the poop out of me. It scares the poop out of me. I think it'll be more beneficial, especially if we're going back into the 3-4 system for players like Tillery. You put Linval Joseph more in his natural position, and even Justin Jones. So you have those 3 guys at the same time in the middle of the interior. I think that's going to be awesome. But this Chargers team last year, man, when it came to the run defense, was just horrible. Bottom half in the run defense was giving up about 119 yards a clip every game. It seemed like that was just the easy pressure point that you could always wear this team down. Whether you were beating him short over the top or the run game, that just seemed like it was the way to go for opposing offensive coordinators against this defense. I don't particularly, with the exception of Christian Covington, I don't particularly feel easy about the depth that we have behind the interior defensive line as well. I think you need a couple more guys back there that can be rotational pieces. Christian Covington obviously fills the Damian Square void left in free agency, but behind that, I don't know. And when you're in the trenches and you have 3 guys like that, we haven't had a presence like that since Jamal Williams to really clog up the holes and stop the run. Linval Joseph may be the closest thing to it. He may be a more athletic version of what Jamal Williams was for his type of size, and to see him run sideline to sideline. But do not have Linval Joseph dropping in coverage, for the love of God. Don't do that again, please. Just have these guys do what they do best. Put someone on the ground, get penetration, stop the run. The run defense scares the shit out of me, but it needs to get better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that the thing about it is you have to have so much faith in Staley, right, and the new defensive coaching staff to fix it, because they didn't add a lot to the position. Mm-hmm. They added Christian Covington, who wasn't a starter last year, really, right? He's been kind of a rotational starter throughout his career. And I mean, just when you see the pure girth of that dude, you feel a little bit better about it. But at the same time, I think there's a couple things you're banking on. You're banking on Jerry Tillery becoming an average run defender on a consistent basis out there. You're hoping that Justin Jones can go out there and continue to improve. But mostly you're hoping that you spreading out the defensive front, right? And that's how Brandon Staley defenses oppose the running game, right? They spread them out. It makes it very hard to double team the defensive linemen, which outside of Linval Joseph, the Chargers don't have a lot of guys who are just going to sit there and anchor against double teams and not just get, clear a garage size space up the middle. So it's going to be a lot of those one-on-ones and the Chargers defensive line winning those one-on-one matchups, right? And I think the other thing is it's going to put a huge emphasis on the linebackers to fill the gaps that these defensive linemen are creating by spreading out the formation. So with Drew Tranquill, Kenneth Murray, 2 guys that so far in their NFL career, what they do better out of their skill set is stopping the run, right? And I think with Kenneth Murray, just having him focus on being more downhill and what we've seen from Drew Tranquill, they're going to have a ton of tackles in this defense. And Brandon Staley had the number one tackling defense last year. But I think it's not only fair to wonder about the overall talent that you have at that position, not just the depth. And I think the depth will help Linval Joseph not play 70% of the snaps this year, which by default could make him better, right? Just having other guys to go in there. But the interior pass rush as well, because I think the Chargers are putting a lot of their eggs in the Jerry Tillery basket as far as who is going to get pressure on the inside. A lot of it's going to get schemed. I think you'll see Joey Bosa in there, even though Brandon Staley will, yell at you and tell you he's an edge defender and he's going to be playing at the edge of our defense. I don't see how they force the interior pressure without it, right? I mean, you can get Uchenna and Kyler Fackrell or Chris Rump on the outside with Joey Bosa coming
Kenneth
up
Murray.
Yeah,
Give me more Kenneth Murray.
And Kenneth Murray blitzing and being more aggressive too. But it's a lot to, Justin Jones has never had more than one sack in a season, right? Linval Joseph didn't have a sack last season. They've been trying out the Brandon Mebanes and the Linval Josephs, and I love him, right? But at some point, you're going to have to get your own guy. You're going to have to invest into a young player or draft a young player very high up in the draft. Even though you just took Jerry Tillery, sometimes you don't get it right. Sometimes that's not enough. Can he get better? Yes. Does it make me nervous that the three guys that are out there starting had like a combined 3.5 sacks last year? Yes, that makes me very nervous. So I definitely agree with the run defense part of it. I think the scheme will help some of it, but it is tough when you don't see obvious improvements at that position. So I definitely get it.
That leads me to another kind of point is development. And I mean, we have the promise of it, right? I think they've said, hey, we're going to go develop players. They went out and get coaches that have track records of success developing players. And that's all good and well, but we have to see it happen, especially with the Chargers, because we've seen them draft so many young players, and it seems like they do not get better at all from the beginning of their contract to the end of their contract. That is something we have to see change if the Chargers are going to have success. If they want to stick to that mantra that Tom Telesco says they want to draft their players, they want to develop their players, and they want to re-sign their players, they have to do the development part. I think this coaching staff can do it. I'm encouraged by what I hear, but I have to see the development and the young players in the Nas Adderleys, in the Jerry Tillerys, and the Kenneth Murrays, the Drew Tranquils, the Michael Davises even. Those are all promising players, but we need to see them take that next step if this team is going to go where they want to go.
Let me come back to you on that, David, because it's funny. This is a conversation that Dan and I have had previously, and when we talk about each position, we always end up talking about the depth aspects of it. Is it more the lack of depth, or is it the lack of development that has really impacted this team?
I mean, I think it's honestly the lack of development. I mean, the Chargers have added a lot of bodies to the position, guys that you think that you see like skill sets that they can work with and that they can accentuate, but that never happens. So I think the Chargers have tried to add depth at positions, and it just hasn't worked out. And then when they try to go get those veterans and plug and play like they did at the linebacker position, like they've done at the defensive line position, that hasn't worked out. So that's why I think their inability to develop players has been the biggest reason why you haven't seen a lot of Chargers get those second contracts and stay with the team, because they haven't done enough to where they've earned that money. So I think that's been the biggest issue, has been that lack of development.
Well, and I think it depends who you ask too, right? If you ask Tom Telesco, he's going to tell you, I picked the right guys and they didn't develop them. I had super talented dudes down there and they weren't getting developed. You ask the Chargers coaches of last year, they might be telling you, we didn't have enough talent at those positions, right? So, like, it depends who you ask. I mean, with Jerry Tiller, with Nazir Adderley, is it a lack of development, or just they're not as talented of players as Tom Telesco and company thought they were, right? So I think that's such a hard question to answer, and depth specifically in developing players, like, that's not a one-year process, right? And Brandon Staley was super upfront about that. Like, that's something that has to happen. But I think what you need, though, is as much as you need to hit on your first-round picks and all of those things, those guys you're getting in the third and the fourth and the fifth round, they have to develop into something, right? And like, we've just seen them strike out on too many of those picks where you don't know if you're ever going to see those guys on the field, right? So like, yeah, it's fine if you want to buy a Band-Aid in free agency, if you have a succession plan. And I think for the Chargers, more often than not, they haven't set themselves up well to have that succession plan. And I think you're already starting to see the seeds of that now with a pick like Josh Palmer, right? You have a lot of receivers, and in the third round, you still go get somebody just because you think he's that talented, and you're just going to take a super talented player and potentially getting yourself ready for when you know you might not have Mike Williams next season. Because even Mike Williams, Uchenna Nwosu, it's a big double-edged sword with these dudes, because if they ball out, the price tag's shooting up, right? If they don't, if they don't go out there and ball out, if anything happens, then you're kind of out of luck either way. Yeah, you might be able to sign them, right, for a cheaper contract, but at the same time, you don't know what you have in them still after 4 years, after 5 years. So I think them setting themselves up down the road for the future is something that is kind of changing, but it's going to be like a multi-year process. We're not going to know how good this coaching staff is at developing these third and fourth round picks, right? Until, a couple of seasons from now. Is Joe Reed going to turn into something? Is KJ Hill going to turn into something, right? Like, we just don't know with some of these guys. Alohi Gilman, like, if those are just wasted picks, that's a bad job if those guys don't turn into something for you, because it's not just 1 year. You're not always going to find guys with fifth round picks. But then you see them go and get like a guy like Terrell Lewis with the Rams, right? He goes in and starts right away. And like, they're getting something out of those later round picks. You're going to have to get something out of those guys if you want to continue to compete in this division and in the NFL, because winning having one good season, 2018, right? That's nice. Unless you get the, consistent, sustained success where you're just a winning team every year, you're not going to get that respect, nor do you deserve it. So I think building, developing, adding more, talent to the roster, all this stuff's going to be a multi-year process, but I think you like where they're starting.
Yeah, I want to go back to beating the Raiders 18 times in a row.
Yeah.
That's
what I want.
The Chargers were relevant then.
They were.
Sure.
Now we are wrapping up our time with the Locked On Chargers crew. David,
I'm excited to see Derwin James. Somebody, I don't know if anyone's mentioned Derwin James.
So in the last,
it's always the obvious one, though. It's just it's
last
easy grab.
That's what we're gonna do. So for the last few, I don't know what all is left on your guys' list. We can go rapid fire. Start shouting out the things that you are excited about. We're gonna end this show on a high note. Everyone, start blowing up the speakers. But no, seriously, one at a time. Let's talk about the things that we are most talking about that we have not already talked about. Dan, started first. Derwin James.
I want to hear all of Jake's pessimistic things first, because I feel like he had more.
Good point.
And
good point.
We didn't really get to hear all of it. And I'm stuck with David, who's the optimist. So I want to hear something,
Hey, I'm stuck with Dan, who's the optimist. So hey, I feel your pain, man.
I like how they say stuck.
Okay. Okay. So pessimism. Yeah, there were a couple more things. We kind of touched on it a little bit. Obviously, the run defense, the lack of depth in the offensive line, while it still has the good big names for the starting competition that's there, is good. But still, that scares me a little bit. Who's going to win out the wide receiver? Who's going to win out the wide receiver 3 competition? Not necessarily something I'm pessimistic about, but I'm interested to see how that goes, because
very interesting.
Especially with Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson, and now with Josh Palmer coming into it. How are you going to utilize Joe Reed and KJ Hill? Please tell me you're going to use him more than just an end around in the Jacksonville game and then just have him disappear for the rest of the 2020 season. So that'll be an interesting competition.
Who's even going to make it, right? Because I don't know if they're keeping 7 wide receivers, so that's a conversation in its own right.
Exactly. I will knock on wood and say that the depth at the safety position behind Derwin and behind Nasir Adderley, that's the combination we've been wanting to see for the past 2 seasons on the field. Still hasn't happened yet.
Well, and play with Joey too, right? And play with Joey, please.
So many snaps without that. So we're going to finally see that competition, but I think that's a spot where there should still be a free agency signing, bring a little bit more depth in there, maybe a little bit more veteran depth, more specifically. That's my pessimistic rant to wrap up the show.
Thank you so much,
David.
Jake.
David, you can balance it now with your optimism.
Flip that upside down, David. Let's hear it.
All right, so it's blitzing. I'm really excited to see the Chargers go back to blitzing the quarterback. Please, God, get after the quarterback. Thank God that loser who never, ever blitzed is gone. And guess what? Guess what's even better? Now he's the defensive coordinator of the Raiders. So now we get to see them never adjust and never blitz the quarterback. So it's going to be fantastic. But no, back to the Chargers. Seriously, I am very excited that they are actually going to blitz. They're going to scheme up ways to get after the quarterback. We might see more NASCAR packages. We might see more corner blitzes. We will see more safety blitzes with Derwin James. We will see Kenneth Murray coming downhill and blitzing from his linebacker spot. We are going to see more sacks this year. That is going to be just unbelievable. I mean, it's going to be really exciting.
If we see Uchenna Nwosu only have 17 or 19 snaps in the game, we riot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We will.
No
question.
I can't believe David just flamed Gus Bradley. I mean, I know he said some not nice things on Locked On Chargers, but I mean, he really just went for it right there. Gus Bradley has a family, I'm pretty sure. And leave that man alone.
And he has a job in the NFL, so I'm sure he's sleeping very well.
Yeah, I mean, the Chargers, for as bad as we thought that coaching staff was, there was a lot of other teams that wanted to bring some of those pieces in. I guess the carousel just continues to turn, but there's a couple of things I definitely had on my list. I mean, Derwin James, obviously, that's the most excited I am for any one particular player this year, is seeing that dude on the field, because him getting downhill is a National Geographic docuseries, dude. It's out in the wild, watching predators attack their prey. I mean, there's so many examples that you can think of against the Raiders, just planting Jalen Richard. Go back a couple years to that big Steelers game, and he's out there planting James Conner on the ground. Him getting downhill is such a nice thing to see. But more than that, though, how Brandon Staley is going to use Derwin James and Joey Bosa to improve the players around him, right? And I think that's the thing that gives you the most hope, is them, using those dudes to make Jerry Tillery better, to make Kenneth Murray better, to make Nazir Adderley better, because he's standing next to one of the best safeties when he's healthy in the NFL. And then the last thing is what will we see when the next group of guys, I talked about the depth being an issue, and just on the positive side of that, I'm excited to see how this coaching staff working more with these guys who are going to be depth, for this team, not just leaving them on the sidelines and letting the ones get most of the reps. The level of difference between who the next guy up is going to be, because we always heard the next guy up mentality. The next guy up still has to play semi-well, right? And I think in the past, it's a Brandon Faison. When Brandon Faison was on the field, you knew it, because the other team went at it every single time. So it's oh yeah, Brandon Faison's on the field. There's 8, curl routes in a row to the left side, and we're just going to take a 2nd and 2 on every single snap. You don't feel like that's going to happen with Brandon Staley, right? Because at least in a defense where you want to dictate the matchups, you're trying to find matchup advantages for your team. If he's getting burnt over there, you're going to send some help, right? And that's the other thing is as much as we know the flaws of the defense, right, and even the offense to some extent, Brandon Staley knows it too, right? So it's how is he going to be able to use these guys to the best of their abilities? And not just that, because that's such a coaching cliche. We're going to use these guys to the best of their abilities. We're going to let them express themselves like they've never expressed themselves all over the field before, right? It's not even that's really good. Covering up their flaws is better, right? Not putting Jerry Tillery in spots where he's going to have to hold down at the point of attack and fight off 2 offensive linemen, right?
Not having Drake Tranquil cover Tyreek Hill.
Exactly. It's stuff like that. That's what I'm excited to see, because I do think that will be one of the benefits you get from this. Is I don't think there's going to be such a huge gap if somebody else has to step on the field. The roster is going to dictate some of that, but you expect for Brandon Staley to at least not just throw the guy in the pool, right, without any safety device. He'll have some water wings out there, so when a new guy does have to step on the field, he has a little bit of help. And when you're in Gus Bradley's cover 3 defense, that's not how it works. It's you're out there, figure it out. With Brandon Staley, you have to think there's a little bit more awareness to try to help the next player up while they're out there on the field. And that is one thing I feel confident in him doing.
And I think, and to be honest, I'll piggyback off of that for the last thing that I was excited for, was we've heard so often this team losing because of this coaching staff. I am excited to see this team succeed because of this coaching staff, not in spite of it. There have been so many times, even last year, Justin Herbert literally pulled the rabbit out of his hat and made this coaching staff look better than they were. he did that on his own, put the team on his back. And a lot of players have done that over the years. I'm excited to see this coaching staff help enable and accelerate the talent of this team, not be a detriment to it.
Preach to the choir, my friend. Preach.
Yeah, no, I think that's a nice bow to put on it. I mean, even like the 4-game winning streak last year, right? Like for us who have to suffer no matter what through every game, we knew a lot of the things weren't fixed, right? And I think that was the terrifying thing that scared me poop was going into this offseason is this front office going to buy into that 4-game winning streak right after
sure they were going to do it.
And like it just seemed like such a Chargers thing to do because the Falcons had Dan Quinn, same exact situation. He wins the last 4 games of 2019. They go 9-7. The Falcons say, let's give him another shot. I mean, at least he had gone to a Super Bowl at that point. Either way, they start off going 0-5 to start the next season. Like those things don't necessarily translate when the same issues are occurring. So credit to the Chargers because I didn't necessarily know for sure. I wouldn't have put any money on it either way because I did not know what they were going to do given their track record. Credit to them for doing that. And I'm very excited to be excited about a coaching staff. And I think right now that's kind of at a fever pitch.
We are talking with Dan Wade and David Droegemeier from Locked On Chargers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I know we went through all kinds of things we're excited for, things we're terrified about. For folks who have not heard Locked On Chargers, they are fantastic at what they do. David, Dan, where can folks find you two good fine men?
Yeah, so for me, you can find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports. You can find David on Twitter at DroTalkSD. Even though he lives in Texas, that part's a little confusing. Still a SD guy at heart. You can find the show at Locked On LAC. And yeah, I mean, we're a daily podcast. It's a little different. I mean, this was nice to kind of, stretch the legs out a little bit and actually not be confined to, 28 minutes. So if you need something that's every day, if you haven't heard of us, we like our show a lot. That's the best endorsement I can give it.
I love it. Jake, close us out. It's on you.
God, what can I say about this group? I mean, you guys just left me on that island by myself. 3 optimistic views and 1 pessimistic. So I kind of just feel
going back to that Gus Bradley scheme.
What it is, man. What it is. I understand how it goes. No, honestly, guys, thank you guys so much. We've built up a nice rapport with you guys over the last couple of months, along with the other podcast. David, you and I go way back, sir. It's good to see you again. Dan,
absolutely.
Very happy to talk to you like this and this dynamic for the first time because the last time that we were doing it was during the coaching carousel and everything like that. And that was
chaos.
A blast. Yes, it was chaos. That's what it was. Organized chaos. So can't thank you guys enough for coming on. Really appreciate your guys' support. Of course, Dan and I will always be supporting your guys' show and what you guys do. Continue to kick ass, continue what you do. And again, we're looking forward to having you guys back on here very soon.
Thank you for having us, man. We really had a good time.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and we will talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed. You can find us at LAC_Unleashed, myself at Chargers Homer, Jake at Jake T. Hefner. Find us on YouTube, subscribe, and we will talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed. Get excited, get amped. Let's get ready for the 2021 Los Angeles Chargers season. Talk to you guys soon.